I'm not seeing some of these stories in the classroom. I'm seeing a lot of translated material that are written by non-Latine authors, but that doesn't always reflect our. And so I think that motivation of like, how can I integrate culture and experiences and also, hopefully tie it back to standards. So this is more like social emotional learning. Inspired me to like, if you don't see it, create it. And I think that's something that a lot of us have to remember that if you want something out there, like take the initiative, like learn about it, reach out to someone who's in that same journey and like put yourself at the table because there's room for all of us.
Ladies, you are in for a very special guest today. I am here with Delia Ruiz, which is an award-winning author of children's books. And I want to say hashtag goals. So Delia, thank you so much for coming to the show. How are you?
Doing good. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so excited to be with you and share in this space.
I'm excited that I found you and I said she has to come to the podcast because we have so many of our listeners that have this dream of writing a children's book. But I want to start at the beginning because I am a little bit chismosa and I always like to know more about our guests. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? Who are your parents? And let's start there.
Yeah, so I am a first generation Latina author, mother, former teacher, but most of my upbringing was also in Mexico as well as the US. So I lived my first 6 years in Mexico. I went to school there. And when I came here to the US to settle in permanently, we decided on Alabama as our main state. And so I went through all my schooling in the South. And, it was the first time learning English and having to navigate the school system with immigrant parents. And I think that, being first gen, that kind of like made me hustle a little bit more and just go after goals and then, ultimately step back into an English as a second language teacher role, which is what I took to learn English. And so it just did kind of like a little full circle there. But I will say that some of my upbringing and, my first native language being Spanish is integrated into my stories now, with most of them being bilingual or available as Spanish edition.
I love that. Now, I'm going to ask why Alabama? I mean, the United States is it's a huge country. Why your parents decided to go to Alabama? Because if I remember correctly based on my history classes, Alabama could not be
Right.
very like
Trust
immigrant
me.
friendly, right?
I asked that question when I was a teenager. I was like, why here? Because originally I was born in Texas. My dad worked in Texas. He worked in the construction area, but he did end up hurting his back. And so he took a little pause and then went back to Mexico to rest. And then when he decided to come back, there was kind of like this boom in the industry in the poultry business in Alabama. And so we had uncles inviting my dad, like, oh, come over here, there's jobs. And so Alabama was kind of the state that was decided on based on the job opportunities during that time.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. And it goes back to the reason why Latinos also seek economic mobility. A lot of our parents don't just stay in one place because they have to quote unquote migrate to the states where opportunities are. Especially, I don't know if your parents had an education, but my mother didn't have an education, and so it's always like just go where the work is. And how did that affected you when you were growing up in terms of your education? Did you have to stop going to school? Did you have to start over, or how did that look like for you?
Yeah, I'm actually the same way. So my parents also did not have that same opportunity to continue their education. They went to school in un rancho, and so it was only to where the school was allowed. After that, you either had to travel to the next school, and so, it just wasn't a choice for them. And so for me, I did have that stability of staying put in one spot. I didn't have to transition to other schools or move across state lines to follow necessarily work. But I did grow up seeing that it was all about work. And so for me, I'm kind of having to relearn of like, what does rest look like? Like sometimes we don't always have to be on the go, go, go just because that's how it was growing up. So even though I did get to stay put in one area, I'm still kind of relearning and trying to make sure that I am integrating that rest into my space as an adult now.
Thank you for saying that. I think that as Latinas, we could totally use more rest because a lot of us don't know what that means. Now, I want to ask you, how did your parents' immigration story affected your relationship with money growing up? And can you give us some examples of the things, the little bit of the struggles or the lot of the struggles that you have to go through because of money?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately they came to the US, right, because they were seeking, an economic opportunity. I come from a family that has, lots of farmers. And so, there's a deep dive into history of like contracts that were signed between the US and Mexico that affected a lot of the farmers. And so ultimately it had the majority of my family come into the US to seek other opportunities. And I think just growing up, I constantly saw the mindset of like save, 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 but not enjoy. And then that was kind of a hard thing for me to grasp as I got older and I did step into the workplace because it was always like, okay, yes, I am saving and I'll save for college, I'll save for like the big things, but where are the moments to actually enjoy? Because I didn't see that growing up. We didn't take vacation. If we did take a vacation, it was like, okay, let's go see family. Yeah, let's come back and it's back to the hustle and like let's keep going, going, going. And so I think like seeing some of that money mindset and just like that saving mindset was something that I did do, but then it got me kind of thinking it's like, okay, it's great to save, but where are the moments where we can actually use this money? Like, and it's okay to use it on yourself or spend it on yourself or invest in yourself. And so that's something that I'm trying to do more of now as an adult.
And I love that because as a mom, you also have to model those good, abundant financial habits and money habits to your family. And so I'm so glad that you're doing that right now because the little ones are watching and our parents learn to sacrifice and hustle. Now, I want to talk to you about your books. So, what inspired you to write this book and why did you decide to also do it bilingual?
Yeah, so my latest book is based on my upbringing in El Rancho, mixed with how is love expressed in a Latina household. So I think coming from a very rural setting, I didn't see like love languages being expressed unless it was acts of service, or sometimes it was money related, like here's un regalito, here's like a little gift, but there wasn't like the verbal or there wasn't much of the physical. And a lot of people in my rural community in Adancho were like that. And so that's how we received love as kids. So it was kind of like mixing, like, how do I combine part of my culture with part of like the universal theme of love that others could relate? Because the story never mentions this is Mexico. So I think what inspired me was, yes, some of my upbringing, but the second part was like, okay, I'm not seeing some of these stories in the classroom. I'm seeing a lot of translated material that are written by non-Latine authors, but that doesn't always reflect our experiences. And so I think that motivation of like, how can I integrate culture and experiences and also, hopefully tie it back to standards. So this is more like social emotional learning. Inspired me to like, if you don't see it, create it. And I think that's something that a lot of us have to remember that if you want something out there, like take the initiative, like learn about it, reach out to someone who's in that same journey and like put yourself at the table because there's room for all of us. And
And I love that. So the title of Delia's book is Ways Papi Says I Love You. But you also have other books, and then you have another book that is essentially based in Puerto Rico. But you are not Puerto Rican, but you are now residing in Puerto Rico. What inspired that book specifically? And go ahead and tell us the title of it too as well.
yeah, so Rocky's Bandero Beat was my first book. It was back in like 2021, I believe. And so I am raising a Puerto Rican child. My son is Puerto Rican. I am married to a Puerto Rican, which is how we landed here on the island. And I'm taking all of it in, even though I had been years. had been coming here visiting years prior. I'm officially living here now, which is very nice. But that book was inspired a lot by my students. So my students back in the day in the classroom, majority of them were Puerto Rican, and as an English as a second language teacher, we were having kind of like a little of like, how do we get reading integration into this classroom and still tie in culture? And so we went and we did some research, and I would play around with my students, and we had like these little eggs and would fill them up with little sand and mixing, and we would practice sounding out syllables, sometimes in Spanish, sometimes in English, because syllable practice, it goes on to reading practice. And so with them, we kind of created this fun storyline of like, what would it sound like if like a little frog was playing music and it was like clapping to a beat? And every single page we were like practicing this teaching standard, and we were tying it to like music related to where they come from, or animals related to where it come from. So a coqui is very popular here, and it wasn't supposed to be anything big. I think ultimately I was like, you know what, I'm going to do something with this manuscript, and I sent it off, and it ended up winning recognition. But ultimately, it was supposed to be like a just a text for my students to practice. During that time, I was already with my husband. I didn't have my child just yet, but I did want to brainstorm like what am I going to give back to my child that is going to be part of his culture. And I think having the story now, I read it for the first time to him last year. It's a fun way that we're integrating his side of the culture, and back
Yeah.
then integrating that teaching standard.
I love that so, so much. I'm finding ways of also integrating my cultura with my daughters, and so I create a bunch of stories. So I love storytelling, and I look back at my childhood experiences, and I will create a story and then just make something up, and they love it, and they're like, "Mom, you should do a book." Like, I'm
Yes.
just finishing one, so give me a break. But yeah, I love this so much. Now, let's talk about what is the investment to publish this type of books? Because first of all, I also want to say I love the fact that you said anybody can write a book because there is room for everyone. That the market is not too saturated. I think every one of us has a story to share. But for you, can you tell me a little bit about your publishing journey? What were the publishing models that you use and why? And if there's anything that you could go back and do different, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So ultimately, there are two sides of publishing. There's the self-publishing route, and then there is the traditional route. And so the publishing route is basically you do everything. So you have to hire an illustrator, you have to hire a print run and editors, and get the book together. You're doing all the job. And a traditional publishing is basically you are just writing the story, that's it, and you're selling the story. And then you have a team who's going to hire an illustrator and do minimal marketing because you still have to market on both sides. But they do everything. They send it off to bookstores, schools, but it does require that you have an agent because you can't get into these bigger publishing houses unless an agent is pitching for you. And so I went both routes. I started with self-publishing, and I really had to go in deep dive like, how do I even get started? Like, and so it was a lot of like YouTube classes and learning about the craft and even reaching out to people. I had a girl that I didn't know at that time who was publishing a book, and I was like, I reached out to her and I was like, can you point to me like any resources that you use? And so I always tell people, if you don't know where to start, like just ask. Like even if people cannot like give you like, handhold you the whole route, they can point to you on like a starting ground or a path or a resource to get started. So yeah, right now I am in the traditional publishing stage. I did acquire an agent 2 years ago, and so most of my books that are coming out now are going to be through publishers. I think I would only step back into the self-publishing phase if I did find a story that I really wanted to tell, and for some reason I couldn't get it pitched, then maybe I would do the self-publishing again and like publish it on my own. But yeah, there are two journeys that you can go about it, and I always say yes, anyone can create a story and join us.
I love that. Now, working with a third party, it's almost like having a corporate job where you have to sit at the table and you also have to advocate for yourself. Through this journey, has there been any moments of that when it comes to negotiating the terms and conditions for the books that you're writing for these publishing homes? And how are you navigating that conversation with them?
Yeah, so ultimately, I feel like I'm more in that position now that I've stepped into the traditional publishing because when you are selling a story, they're just seeing the words and they can ultimately create that story any way they want to. Of course, you always have to decide like, is this the best fit for the story? And, you go through all the contract and all of that. But ultimately, because the traditional publishing does require you to have an agent, you want to make sure that this is a person that's going to advocate for you for life because an agent is usually for life unless something happens for them or they're stepping away from their work field, like this is a partnership. And so deciding on that agent was like number one in my book. Like I have to have someone that agrees with me, my morals, my missions, my values, because they're going to be pitching me and they're going to be the ones standing up for me and at the table because you don't always join them. You usually have an agent that steps in for you. But I did encounter a little bit of that when I was actually publishing my story, Ways Papi Says I Love You, the one that I mentioned was in El Rancho, because it did take place outside of the US. And a lot of the stories that we see here that are children's books, they're either based on US holidays, US classroom settings, and there's not a lot of books that take place outside of the US. And if it is Mexico, it's city Mexico. It's, luxurious Mexico. It's not El Rancho Mexico. So I think when I was pitching this story, I told them like I really want it set in the rural setting. And you did have to prove yourself. I had to like bring in statistics of like, look at our immigrant population, look at how many people are coming here that are coming from rural settings, whether it's Guatemala, Honduras, wherever it may be. I'm like, look on how many people might be able to relate to this. So yeah, I had to like you kind of like have to prove yourself at that table, right? And
Yeah.
like to get this out there. So I did encounter that, but I think also having people who are going to stand beside you and like really value your vision and your goals is super helpful. So if you
Yeah.
ever do sign with an agent, make sure it's someone that's going to be a great partner for life with you.
I love this. As you are describing the partnership, it also makes me think of the power of intentionality, especially on how you're going to make money, how you're going to be receiving money. So, being in alignment with someone who respects you as a writer, but also respects your values, I think that's just like so powerful. Now, I want to ask a follow up question to this, and that is, where did you find this agent? Because there's so many people out there. There are also so many scams out there, people that promise you a New York Times bestseller. But how do you know where to find these people? Or how do you know like who's who of the agent world?
But there is a website where you can search for agents and you go through their profiles and you kind of start seeing what's on their wish list. Like, I'm currently only taking stories about horror right now or about this. See which one is a good fit for you and start doing more research on them. Like, look at their profiles, look at their websites, look at who are their clients. And so a good green light is once you find someone and you are booked for a call, 'cause it can take years sometimes to get that call from an agent, is if they let you speak to their clients. And for me, my agent was like, look, here's a list of who I represent. Feel free to chat with them and they can tell you like exactly how my style is, what they like working about me. And so like I did a lot of research to figure out, is this the person who I want to be with? So yeah, there is a website you can look for. I would also say there is a great website, highlightsfoundation.org. They teach a lot of classes on how to get an agent, and so I took classes through there, and they're pretty affordable. Most of their mini classes, that you get a recording, and they teach you how to write that pitch letter. Because when you're getting ready to get an agent, you do have to have what's called a query letter, and it's a polished one-piece letter where you're really pitching your project. And you also have to have about 3 to 5 polished works because if they are interested in you, they're gonna wanna see other samples. I think the only red flag that I can say at the moment is if you are being told that you have to pay to publish, that is a red flag. That's probably something that's not gonna end up well because in the publishing route, at least traditional publishing, you don't have to pay. You only get paid when you sell a manuscript, and then you get paid in royalties. Self-publishing is when you have to pay yourself because you're funding the whole project. That's the only red flag that I can think of at the moment, and I will send over a link of website in case anyone's interested on where to look for agents.
Yeah, we have so many people that have mentioned this is why I started recording podcasts with others because I have been writing my book Cash Libre for about a year. That feels like forever. And I finally hire a publishing home. I'm going the hybrid route. And so for me, it was I did a lot of homework, but I was also working with a book coach that guided me. So I didn't want to go find all of these research that I know exists just because I am really busy, but it's working out pretty good. And so because of that, people started asking me, hey, how do you do this? And I said, there's so many ways of publishing a book and I don't have all the
Right.
answers. So I'm going to bring all of these Latina authors to share with us what has worked for them, right? And so thank you for sharing those tips. Now, I want to ask you a little bit more about what's next for you because now you live in Puerto Rico. Are you still teaching? What's in the works for you?
Yeah, so I stepped away from teaching and I'm currently writing, a full-time mom, and I'm working at the same time at a book festival and at other writing organizations. So yeah, what's next for me? I'm continuing to write. I have three books out in 2026, two out in 2027. So I am continuing to write these stories, continuing to pitch out there and yeah, and just teach classes. I work in more in the writing space, and so I used to teach a self-publishing class, and it was just a very lengthy course, and so I stopped doing that. But I do just offer services for authors. So if there's anyone listening and you want to learn more about, how to make sure your books are being seen out there, or even how to get into the traditional space, are some things that I walk people through. And so, yeah, just doing that stuff on the side with writing and being a full-time mom just takes up my whole time. But regardless of that, I feel like it's important to have these goals and have these stories out there. So I'm continuing to write and I'm excited for these next projects that are coming out. Still bilingual, still Spanish titles because that's something that I'm always going to push for.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. And I also want to say, like, being a mom is a full time mom. And while you might not have a quote unquote office job, you are still pursuing your dreams. And I think that it's also important to highlight that because you're not saying, well, now I'm a mom and I'm going to give up my dreams. Like you're still writing, you're still teaching, and you're in a season of your life where there is a little bit of a slowdown, but doesn't mean that all of this work and all of this expertise that you have is gone. It's just in a new season of your life. And so, congratulations on being a mom. Congratulations on prioritizing your family, because I think that's also very important. So, for those of you that want to buy her book or even hire her for her expertise on publishing, you can find her on Aventuras ENELSELS.com. So, Delia, what is your definition of wealth before we close?
Yeah, I think for wealth for me it's related to like a safety factor as well, like having enough where I feel safe, but also tying it with balance. How do I use wealth to give back to my community, whether that's through classes, stepping into places where I can help others, and also like using that balance of wealth to better my own life. And I'm thinking more health wise. And so for me, wealth is not necessarily tied to saving so much as my parents did, like save, 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 like let's never touch it. It's more like how do I distribute it into areas that's going to fulfill my life and also touch the aspect of community back. So yeah, it's something that I'm actually working on now and having a better relationship with money and wealth.
I
It's a
love
growing
it.
journey.
Yes, it is. The more we grow, the more we shed those hustle and conditioning. There are times when it feels a little bit heavy, but I know that you're doing the right thing. And congratulations on all of your books. I cannot wait to share them with my ninas. And thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thank you, and a big congrats to you too, because you are also killing it out there with your books and mom life. So I
Thank
congrats you
you.
as well.